Welcome to listen to this Bull Show. My name is Matt Mulholland. I'm with Dean Franklin. Our names are backwards on this. And we also have Andrew Behrens on the show today. If you've never seen the show before, this is the show where we talk about bullshit in the insurance world. We talk about bullshit and just about anything else as well. And we answer your questions live. So if you're watching this live, you get to ask questions via the chat channel. And we will pull them on the screen and we will answer them. Today, we're going to be talking about Xactimate private price lists, whether or not that's a thing or legal, and it's weird and interesting. And I'm going to push this button and then we'll start talking about it. As soon as I find my button. Here it is. Andrew Behrens.
What is up? Thanks for having me.
How the hell are you?
I'm good, man. Staying busy. But yeah, I'm doing really good.
What's the name of your company now? CAG?
You know what? I know you think that's funny, Matt, but no, I tend to say CAG or Construction Analytics Group. So, or CAG. If you want it to sound like HAG, whatever. Yeah.
A CAG order?
Yep. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, you really ought to be using that. There's nothing better than a CAG order. All right. Oh, I got Alejandro in here. Dean is the man. This is Dean Franklin. I met Dean on site many years ago, waiting for an adjuster to show up. And then it turns out that that adjuster was also going to show up to a claim directly across the street that Dean was on. And I thought that Dean was the adjuster. So I went up to go talk to him and be like, why are you just sitting in your car, dude?
I was just chilling, hanging out.
Yeah.
That's
And then he found out I was a PA.
I pretended to be the adjuster for a little bit.
Well, I think that you
I
kind of
in your car.
Yeah. You were nervous that I was there to take over your claim too, I think.
I do.
Yep. That was pretty funny. Anyway, so I helped Dean out with his claim on a discontinued shingle. And now I'm actually at his office. We're doing private training together this week for his team and company. I know you do private training too, don't you, with CAG?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do. So consulting, expert witness work kind of make up the most of my work. Training for sure. You know, I'm an Xactimate certified trainer. So of course I have the learning management system. Most of it's online, but I'm just kind of starting to get into physical classes again. That's kind of been a transition, obviously out of COVID. I think people are kind of preferring in person again. So it's been kind of cool to ease back into that as well. So
yeah, that works. All right. So everybody kind of knows your background, but just in case, what have you been doing over the years that makes you someone that I should have on a podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the industry for over a decade now. Started out in estimation investigations for C3 Group, a public adjusting company nationwide. They kind of grew, but my role really throughout the public adjusting process remained the same. And that was investigations, really providing claim packages to carriers and our adjusting team to represent to carriers, as well as all the substantiation that comes with it. So building codes, construction methodology, repair methodology, all things like that. And then over time, I got more into acquiring certifications, things like my level 3 Xactimate user certification. And then I got my Xactimate trainer certification. So I'm an Xactimate certified trainer. And then that led to expert witness work, and it just kind of cascaded into that. So right now I only do hourly work. I don't do anything contingency, which is really good for me because that's hard to kind of do both, be an expert and contingency, So I just kind of pursued that with it being my passion and all. So
there's a lot of people that are talking about expert work these days, public adjusters that want to move into that. And we don't get a lot of good examples of people that have made that transition. Mm-hmm. Is there any advice you could give to somebody that wants to become more of an expert witness and less of a public adjuster?
Yeah, I mean, so I think public adjusters, I think if they're good, they're going to probably get exposed at some point to expert witness work. And what I mean by that is you can look up Rule 26. It's the federal rules for expert witness testimony. And you can basically look through that and you can see the requirements for being an expert witness. And it's that obviously you're objective. You don't have any financial interest in the outcome of it. You have to show your methodologies. They have to be able to be replicated. And then really you're going all the way to potentially a jury trial and testifying your opinions. And you're not representing anybody. You're just stating your facts. You're paid to represent your opinion and state your opinion. And that that is just what it is, But I think if I had advice, it would probably be to, I think a lot of people have trouble separating themselves from representing a policyholder all the time and making sure that they're like almost in a kind of a fiduciary responsibility to that insured to then just representing the facts, and sometimes that's hard because I think I've seen cases where the carrier is right, the public adjuster is wrong. I mean, that happens. Or in the construction defect world, which I also work, the builder's right, the plaintiff is wrong, So, I mean, it happens where, the side that, public adjusters are always on, sometimes they're not always right. So I think that's kind of a weird transition.
No, that's not true.
True. The facts are what they are, So, I mean, and I've talked to you, Matt, about it, but I've seen public adjusters represent $300K in code upgrades that don't apply, So, I mean, it happens on both sides, So I think that's kind of why I kind of like doing it, is because I like finding the facts and they are what they are. And I think that's valuable. I think that's valuable on both sides. So, yeah, I mean, I think if I had advice, it's kind of separate yourself from being on one side and really just having facts drive your opinions. So,
do you think that there's more documentation necessary on the expert side than on the PA side?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
really? Because I've seen the files as a PA and they're pretty damn complex.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on the sense you're referring to. I mean, obviously, when you're adjusting a claim, you're going to be very policy driven, which you are on the expert side in a sense, depending on what you're disclosed as. A lot of times I'm disclosed just to really make an opinion on, means of repair or repair technique. Sometimes it's just the cost of repair. Sometimes it's Xactimate software usage, So it really depends on kind of what I'm tasked with. But I will say, I think that the difference is really the ability to be replicated, showing your methodology. It's much more, I'd say involved, just to show everything and all of your opinions in a report format so that the other side can prepare, so they know what you're testifying to, and they can actually throw you out. I mean, they can disqualify if you're not showing your methodologies properly, if you're not, if you don't have any ability to be replicated by another expert, you kind of look partial or subjective, and they can attempt to disqualify you, and that would suck. So there's a lot at stake.
All of those reasons, most of the reports that I read from engineers hired by insurance carriers should be thrown completely out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people use the excuse of, their experience almost being the methodology or the approach in expert witness services. And it's just, I mean, you have to cite things that have already been established, peer reviewed. You can't just pull everything out of the sky and say, well, I have experience and that's why it's correct. I mean,
right.
And you see that a lot on lots of engineering reports. So
it gets a little bit ridiculous, some of the stuff that they've said over the years. I've sat in with Dean's team today. Some of the stories that they're telling me, something new I've never seen before. The insurance companies changing the cause of loss to other.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something you guys are seeing more of? Yeah.
Anything other than hail or wind.
Yeah.
They change it on their official report. So when you call in a claim and you give them the cause of loss and they put it in their drop-down menu, might be hail or wind or whatever it is, they've changed it to other after they investigated, which is both good news and bad news. Good news is they have the ability to change the cause of loss in their system. We have proof. Bad news is the hell is other. And by the way, other not excluded.
Yep.
So just weird. I've never seen it before. You ever seen that? I've never seen that.
I haven't. Usually it's specified, but that's also honestly what's nice about the expert side is you don't get into all the BS. I mean, it's really just you're tasked with this, and you're like, cool, here you go.
There's no BS on that side.
I mean, there's BS. Obviously, you have to sort through a lot of BS, but I would say as far as what you're tasked with, I mean, things like that, I would think would be pretty easily corrected. I mean, if there's a known cause of loss, I mean, that is the peril. That's what's being claimed. That's what's going to go into trial. Of course, you might have causation issues, but I mean, little tactics like that, I haven't really encountered much.
I don't know where they're going with it. It's such a strange thing to change it to other. You can't prove that there's no coverage for other. It doesn't make sense. It's a weird play.
Yeah, not sure I understand that. Crazy.
Anyway, something I came across. So let's talk about Xactimate custom pricing. Is this a thing that you are the only one that offers ever? Is this a CAG invention?
No, so people have been
I'm saying
around.
it like 10 times just to bother about this entire
No, it's fine. I don't get bothered. So there have been individuals that have created custom price lists for contractors. I mean, there are contractors out there who have used custom price lists. But I think we are one of the first few that are approaching it in the sense of trying to, approach the market in a broad sense and not just be really specific. So yeah, I mean, the whole intention really behind it is that, obviously when you're in the adjustment phase, let's say you're State Farm, or let's say you're a public adjuster and you don't have any knowledge of a contractor and their costs to actually do the project, you're likely going to use Xactimate, Symbility, whatever, to establish that, and those softwares are really driven by representing a median or prevailing wage price point. And they're really hypothetically established, if that makes sense. But in my opinion, is if you're a contractor and you're using this software that doesn't have any specificity to your actual costs, but you just take it and you just run with it, I think it causes a lot of issues. And I think we see those issues where contractors use Xactimate, they maybe settle a loss, and then maybe the carrier goes after them. They want to see their invoices. They want to make sure that what they actually put into Xactimate is actually what they're spending. So you can see where that becomes problematic, and that's a big conversation, obviously, because you have a lot of different contractor structures, and I talk about this a lot, where you have general contractors that sub out their labor, they might sub out the whole trade, they might use in-house employees, and Xactimate's really meant to represent one situation, one price structure, organizational structure. But yeah, the point being is that when you're a contractor, why aren't you representing your own costs? Why aren't you ensuring that the costs you're actually putting into the carrier represent your costs? Because I think when you get to the invoicing stage, those should be consistent, So
if they were to actually ask you then as a contractor to show your invoices and your costs, you wouldn't have any reason to say no at that point. Got it all built in.
Well, and I think the big thing is obviously you have to decipher between what I just explained of like, if you get an invoice that represents maybe part of a subcontract trade or the whole thing, let's say, I mean, I see a lot of issues where maybe contractor invoices are reviewed and they represent maybe just the labor being subcontracted out, whereas the GC maybe took on other responsibilities and they didn't contract out the whole trade, and you can see how it gets really commingled. So Xactimate's really structured in breaking out the subcontract trade, and then the user driving 10 and 10 ONP for a GC or whatever it ends up being. And they're very separated, but in the real world, they're very interlaced. You have so many different organizational structures and setups. So really the point being is that, there's a way in Xactimate to take contractors' overhead costs and integrate them into what in Xactimate is called retail labor rates. And that's where the subcontractor and all the overhead and all that resides. It's actually on an hourly retail labor rate basis. So it's not on materials. It's not on equipment. There's no markup in that stuff. It's all in the hourly rate. So if you're a contractor and you know your overhead and you get an objective third-party source to publish price lists, one being an Xactimate certified trainer, one being an Xactimate certified pricing consultant. And actually, I just acquired that too. Did you know that exists?
I didn't.
Okay.
What is that?
So essentially it's, Verisk and Xactware. It's kind of interesting. And I know there's a lot of, animosity between Xactware and contractors on the PA side. And obviously, I'm a proponent of Xactimate in a lot of ways, although I agree that it falls short, especially in certain areas, like you go into Atlanta and the rates are terrible, but the purpose of it,
they are terrible across the nation.
Yeah, he's very poor as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the purpose of it's called the Xactimate pricing consultant course, essentially. And it's a course, a very small group that Verisk puts on. There's a pretty big wait list. It used to be free. Now they're charging for it a little bit, but it's not that much. But really the intention is to get contractors, they're really targeting contractors, to understand how pricing feedback works, because there's so many misperceptions about it, to know how to submit pricing feedback, to really know how they integrate feedback. Like, some of the misperceptions are like you finish an Xactimate estimate, you hit complete, it goes to let's say if Veris surveys through exact analysis, they take that information and they automatically accept it or somehow implement that into their price surveys, and they don't. It's actually driven by the other approaches they use. But I mean, something that simple, it creates a lot of just misunderstanding in the market. So I took that just because, even though I'm not a contractor, obviously I work with a lot of contractors and I work a lot with the cost side of Xactimate. So I recommend if you're a contractor, get on the wait list. You can actually email pricing@verisk.com and ask to be on the wait list. And you'll probably learn something. You'll learn about how the pricing structures work, how to submit feedback, and what they do with that data, even when they get it. So
Yeah. And anybody can get that even without the certification for use.
It's totally separate, but after you get it, you take an exam and you're actually known as an Xactimate certified pricing consultant. So essentially, you're someone that they actually assign you an evaluator or a surveyor, basically at Verisk, that you can work with to submit data to. If you're in a region where retail labor rates are really poor on the roofing side, and you have substantiation to show that's way off, you can work with that person. So I think that there are regions in the United States like Atlanta. You look at Atlanta versus Denver, or you look at like parts of Texas, really just anywhere in the middle of nowhere where there's not as much data to survey. You find issues where if there's big increases, there's not enough data to really make that an instant increase or feedback. So
Yeah.
So Andrew, I got a question. Does this apply to kind of what you're saying? Is last year a big hailstorm come through Augusta, Georgia, and we were working that. And when the pricing first came out, I mean, we were terrible. It was like $265 a square. So I actually wrote an email to Xactimate and I'm like, listen, this is way out of line and these are my costs. Well, they actually made a change to it. Now it's very, very comparable to what it should be.
awesome.
So you're telling me that this training that I could take could make me a consultant where I could actually make changes in markets of where I work?
Well, so it's really to establish a relationship between you. If you use Xactimate and you're a consultant, you're more of a trusted source for them. I think you hold a little more clout because you're proven to know how the pricing structure works. The kind of you're not trying to really manipulate any of the pricing feedback you give them. You know how it works. You know how it's integrated. So I think you're just more of a certified, almost trusted source for Verisk. And it is kind of funny. A lot of contractors, they're not happy with the pricings and they don't do anything. They just kind of whine about it. So props to you for submitting that. And honestly, it's kind of cool to see that they did make a change,
Yeah, they did.
I think it's funny. And yeah, in the Denver area, it was funny because we had a lot of contractors back in 13, 14, 15 that said, oh, it's stagnant. But it's interesting. I mean, I've used Xactimate for over a decade in this region. And the retail labor rate used to be like 115. Now it's like 230, 240. So I think in areas where you have more data, more involvement, more contractor feedback, I think you see more accurate rates. But obviously it's not perfect. So kind of going back to the price list program, it's like if you're a contractor, you know your costs. Why not submit that to a carrier? Why not make sure that they know that, hey, these are my costs. You can compare it to an Xactimate native published price list and you can see how it compares. But
they don't need to know that information for the contractor. Why would they be asking for that kind of stuff? It feels fishy. I don't want to submit my costs because I don't want them to have that data that they don't have any rights to. They don't have to be privy to that.
What's kind of interesting though about that point is, let's say you use Xactimate and the price lists are way low. You're not happy with the pricing on a unit by unit basis, like on the price themselves within the components. Most contractors will use other Xactimate line items to get the price up to where they need it to be. And they'll use supervision, they'll use tarps, they'll use general labor, whatever it is. But what's interesting about that is that they kind of use fluff to get the price point where it needs to be. And a lot of times it gets kind of overcome and it gets driven back down to kind of where Xactimate's published by default. Matt, what do you think?
Fluff. What does that mean?
I see a lot where, they include things they shouldn't, or maybe they include tarps, in their default intent is like they include nails, they include battens, they include the tarps, they include labor, and it's really meant for like mitigation. But a lot of them will use that for like landscaping, where it's including nails and furring strips. And, it's just things where things they may not be applicable, but they use it for a purpose that maybe they need, but they're just not really interpreting Xactimate correctly. All I'm trying to say is that you have these contractors that use Xactimate. They include all these items that may be fluff. And then the end price, though, is correct. Let's say they need to be at 500 a square, and they get to 500 a square. It doesn't matter what the line items say. They just they include these items to get to the end cost. And a lot of them are using it in kind of a lump sum manner. But the carrier looks at that and they're like, well, your end cost is not accurate to me until I see why you're including these things. Is every little line item accurate, et cetera? They pick apart all these things that maybe they're not valid. And then they get back down to 350, 300 a square, whatever. And I think that's an issue. So back to your point, Matt, do you need to show your costs? One thing about this is it's not showing them your overhead percentages. It's not. If you were to break, what was that?
But they ask for this sometimes, and it's usually when you're asking for overhead and profit when they do this to you, right? I want to get overhead and profit, and overhead and profit is supposed to be 10% overhead, 10% profit. So they ask for your costs. Let us see your costs, and we'll give you the overhead and profit. But it's a trap. It's a trap, right? I wish I could do that fish voice. It's a trap. I don't do it very well. I need to learn to do that one.
So Matt, why
pointed out on here that other than loss settlement provision in the policy, a contractor's actual costs from a pricing standpoint has no impact on the amount of loss, at least in Texas case law. But you're saying that they could send that in if they manipulate Xactimate to match their actual prices. What does that look like?
So I'll make the point kind of back to what you were saying. So let's say that you submit your end invoice for the amount you actually need to complete the project. And it's not like Xactimate. Let's say Xactimate comes in at $1 million, you're at 1.2, and you're not itemizing things, whatever. They can compare that and be like, well, there's a $200,000 delta. Okay, cool. If you use the custom price list program, everything is integrated in a manner where they're not able to tell your overhead percentages. They're not able to tell any of that stuff. We calculate that. We look at profit and loss statements. We essentially look at what your overhead is. We know how to integrate that into every rate across the board. So any trade you put in an Xactimate, it's representing your overhead percentage. Anything you do in Xactimate, the overhead is specific to your company. So I think that that's huge, although I can see it getting, some kickback for a while, but it's interesting because if you look at and I know, Matt, you've probably looked at the user service agreements within Xactimate before, but it's interesting. It says the price data shall not be used to preclude actual market requirements, market conditions, whatever. So you're not even supposed to use the price data in its default format to reject actual costs from contractors. But
can you say that one more time slowly and with emphasis?
Yes. And actually, I'll pull it up and I'll read it to you. How about that?
Oh, good. I think this is a really important part because they do this all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that this exists, but it's something that I think is interesting because Xactimate's either going to meet your needs as a contractor in its default format or it's not. And you know this, when it doesn't meet it, a lot of parties will use Xactimate to say, that's unreasonable. If Xactimate's more, they'll be like, oh, you didn't even incur what Xactimate represented, So you can see that, there's a lot of moving parts there. But yeah, let me pull this up real quick. So this is in the user service agreement for Xactimate software. Anyone who uses it agrees to these terms.
Automatically. Do you agree to do it exactly the way it's written just by using the software? And you probably clicked on a little checkbox or something along those lines. Yeah, but to give you a little background, when you are putting your pricing together as a contractor, or if a public adjuster is writing this, the policies, they pay for the reasonable and necessary amount that's incurred or spent by the policyholder to repair or replace the damaged property. And then it might be depreciated in ACV only payment, or it might be RCV.
Yep.
Or they might have a schedule for depreciation.
Yep.
But generally speaking, it starts with a replacement cost value that is reasonable and necessary. So just because it's in Xactimate that way doesn't necessarily mean it's reasonable, but that's what they're saying. Xactimate is the most reasonable price, and so this is the only price that they pay.
Well, and I think it is important too, Matt. Like a lot of policies will establish ACV at the time of loss, and it's a lot of confusion because they're like, we only offer pricing at the time of loss, and it's like,
What does that mean? Have you heard the Merlin argument on that?
I think I've been a little bit behind on their blogs just because I've been pretty busy. But I mean, I've heard generally what I do, and I'll say is I establish ACV at the time of loss, but replacement cost is really kind of a trailing thing, you know.
So when is the time of loss for you? What does that mean for you?
I mean, yeah, it's the general time frame. It doesn't mean the day of. It can mean lots of things, you know.
It doesn't mean the day of?
I mean, I think that there's a case where, you know, let's say the time of loss, let's say you're looking at a lot of these fire losses that happened in Colorado a couple of years ago. I mean, you had market conditions spike, you know, you had demand spike, you know, and a lot of those aren't realized in that price list until 30, 60 days later. So I would argue that the time of loss is really the time that encompasses that event, you know, like what are the conditions that move price? What are the price action movements, you know, like what causes the prices to move? So I think it may depend, but I think, yeah, I mean, time of loss is obviously a pretty vague.
It is vague, and that's the issue. It's an ambiguous term, and time-related arguments happen all the time. We're talking about prompt notice is argued, and the word immediate is argued. When they say at the time of loss, that means at that moment. There's no ambiguity on at. It's not immediately after. It's not the day after. It's not after the loss producing event, but that same month and that same price list. And the Merlin argument is this, because they've won some recent cases that were arguing that they only owe for damages at the time of loss. Well, what would it cost to have all your materials and labor there during the loss producing event? That's the cost at the time of loss. It's a ridiculously high number. It's an impossibly high number. It's not possible. I think when we're arguing time type semantics, at the time of loss, that does make sense. It does. It seems unreasonable. But to ask for someone to calculate RCV the day after the loss is also unreasonable, because no one can do that, especially after a major event where their pricing is all going to go.
Yep.
So,
well, I see both. Like I see where, you know, really if someone chooses not to perform the work, they're still owed the ACV payment, you know. So I think it is important, I can see, to establish ACV at the time of loss, where, you know, if you don't go do the work, it's established. But I mean, really replacement cost, that recoverable depreciation that's making up the difference between RCV at the time of loss to RCV when you complete the work, when it's actually reasonably incurred. I mean, the RCV figure is what matters, you know, but yeah, I have this pulled up, Matt, if you are you good for me to read this off?
do it.
So it says you acknowledge and understand that price data provided as part of the services, meaning Xactimate software, are intended to target the most representative price of the various price points collected relevant to the specific line item in question. Having the single representative price per line item computed from all valid price points researched within the market means that some price data are higher and some price data are lower than that which are reported. And then this is the important sentence. So it says, you agree not to prohibit or preclude deviations from the price data or contractor requirements, market conditions, demand, or any other factor warrants the use of different line item price in the specific situation. So that's a really powerful sentence, really.
It's pretty good. So if you were to ask an adjuster if that's asking you for your pricing, or to say that your pricing is off, we only pay for what Xactimate pays, it's a ridiculous statement, because the way that they're using the program is completely wrong. So
yeah, and there's a lot of variables of, you know, obviously whether or not you have a custom price list that's representing your pricing as a contractor, or they're using published price lists. I mean, you have to include all the necessary components. So
if we're talking about custom price lists that contractors use, insurance companies, some of them have custom price lists themselves, but they're not the ones performing the work. So how would they be able to manipulate their price list?
From everything I've seen, when carriers adjust the price list, they are subjective, arbitrary changes of 5%. Like they'll reduce the supporting events percentages by 5%, which affect the yield and the retail labor rates and all that. So usually I think it's funny when carriers create their own price list, because it's like, wait a minute, like the prevailing wages are already represented in Xactimate under the published price list, like through millions of data points, billions of data points from the past decade, So it is interesting to me that, even if they have one or two data points or contractors who say, no, that's the intention of Xactimate, is to filter out low data points, high data points, prevailing data points, and try to really cluster prices to where it's fair, which is also covered in the consultant pricing class. It's actually pretty interesting.
There are policies that state, the Farmer Smart Plan, for example, is one of these. There are policies that state that they can provide pricing based on their own internal discounted prices. And so if they have a preferred vendor network that takes 10% less than what Xactimate normally takes, then with that policy, they may be able to force you to take 10% less than what your other contractor might actually perform it.
Yep, very true.
There's a link. You're not going to click on the screen, but if you happen to be in LinkedIn watching this, there is a link there for the Merlin Law Group Law Blog, which is awesome, where Chip talks about the at the time of loss issues. But yeah, so if an insurance company is making their own pricing and they're reducing the average price list for that area, it doesn't seem reasonable to me. Who gets to decide what's reasonable?
Well, I think that one of the benefits of Xactimate, I think it always has been this way, is that if you're a qualified user and you're using it correctly, you're including all the necessary line items, you're not fluffing things, but you're also not omitting things that are necessary. I know you like that word. You don't like the word fluff, do you? You hate that word.
I'm in a gutter all the time in my head.
I know you are. I can tell, but I think there's a benefit in
the mid a lot today.
I think that there's a value of establishing, though, an amount that's based on, hypothetically, a bunch of prevailing price points. I think that that's valuable, but I think what really is reasonable is comparing that to what's actually incurred. And Matt, I think I've mentioned this to you, but Xactimate came out with a bulletin. I think the last one was like 2017. It's called Roofing Prices in Xactimate. And it's really interesting because it talks about how in any market Verisk surveys, there in the shingle market, there's a minimum of 50 to 70% difference from low to high. And they say it's not uncommon to see 100% difference from low to high. So I think it's kind of interesting because many people think that the price range is really narrow, and if you're 5 or 10% above what Xactimate, publishes, you're fraudulent or whatever, even below. But
that's reasonable is a broad term anyway. You could have one contractor that charges $100,000 for a job, and another contractor charges $120,000 for the same job, and both be considered reasonable.
Yes, because it's specific to the actual overhead and their organizational structures and their actual needs as a contractor. And again,
what is unreasonable then? What does it mean to be unreasonable?
I think that it becomes unreasonable when you have contractors intending on kind of gouging, like when they're making insane margins and they're trying to mark up things 2-3 times and they're trying to hide it in certain things. It's just, I think even that's a vague term, but I've seen contractors where they're, double Xactimate, where maybe if you were to go look at their P&L, there's no way you could substantiate that, So yeah, I think it depends, but I think a good point there is that reasonable is really specific to the contractor and their organizational setup and their overhead needs, and that's going to vary, and Xactware even states that in a lot of their publications.
Most people would have a hard time identifying what is reasonable, but most people would find it easier to identify what's unreasonable. I think we probably agree a lot of times on something that's unreasonable.
Yep.
But agreeing that it's reasonable is hard. Do you have a question?
I do. So, is it reasonable that these insurance on Xactimate, they put this in MSW pricing for the shingles or the ITIL? I don't know if y'all have ever seen that. What's that about? Why are they? And it's nowhere near the actual cost of what it is.
So that Mad Sky pricing.
Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of times they don't put some of the other materials in that. They're just giving you the pricing for the shingles, but that line item has other things in it. It's got nails in it. I think it has sealant in it as well. So they're not giving you the material pricing for those. If you just add those two materials to it, it brings it back up a little bit. But it is ridiculous. If you were to ask them for all the other materials for the roof to order it all from one place, all from that same place all at once, the other materials are much higher in price than what you would get in your local market. I learned this from a buddy of mine yesterday on Facebook. He wrote about this and some of his experiences, and just asking them, basically placing their entire order with that same company, and it ends up being higher cost for the materials overall than what they were getting somewhere else.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's a good time to point out. So in that consulting course, they cover this very in depth, but you may have heard of open for inspection functionality like an Xactimate. So anyone that's been using Xactimate a long time, it's funny, there are a lot of people that are still surprised to know that you can review every yield, you can review every little component down to the nails, down to the box of nails, how much it costs, and you can update those things to where they actually retroactively change unit costs in Xactimate if they're using those components, but that's really cool because you can cross-reference. If you're getting price data and there's only one thing quoted, you can go and be like, well, look, Xactimate includes 4 other components, and these are the costs. What are your costs? What if I order these through you? So
to get into what it is that you're actually providing for contractors, you are going into their company and finding out what their costs are, and you're baking that into their Xactimate.
Yep.
How often do you have to manipulate or change it?
So it's interesting. Contractors, let's say you're in Colorado and you work, let's say you work out of Castle Rock. You're kind of right in between El Paso County, Douglas County there, kind of between the Denver and Colorado Springs price lists, but maybe occasionally go down to Pueblo. A lot of contractors will find their costs don't really change. They're getting materials from the same spot, whatever. So really we allow the contractor to tell us how many regions they need. So let's say one's in Colorado, one's in Dallas, one's in Fort Myers, Florida. We would basically produce 3 custom price lists for them and periodically survey not only for overhead changes in their company, but also if there's material changes, we would update that price list. But essentially,
every month when a new list comes out, you would update their custom list to match with the line items from that monthly list. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, a lot of times the prices are actually tied together. So custom price lists are actually tied to an existing price list in Xactimate when you create them. So material increases, things like that, they actually trail in the custom price list, which is really cool.
Does it automatically apply? Like if you make one change, you don't have to go and make that change again if you update the price list to a new month? Like I remember having to change the labor component if I was going from RFG or demo to RFG or something on a line item that clearly needs a skilled roofing laborer. If I were to update the price list, it would kill that, and I'd have to go back in and manually change it back to RFG. Does it do crap like that?
Well, no. So it's the difference between using a price list that's published and changing it in the software versus publishing a price list and it's actually in the instance. It's actually in the cloud. So
oh, no kidding.
The contractor actually gets instructions to type in the price list name. They get it from Exact Analysis. We publish it, of course. So at that point, it's in their software and all the changes are reflective of their company costs. It's not.
Could an insurance company then use that same price list?
Yeah, they could. Yeah. I mean, especially if they had the ESX file. So what's kind of cool about Xactimate, I don't know if, I'm sure some of the people, maybe some of the listeners have done this before, but you can pull a variation report or a differences report, and you can actually compare two Xactimate estimates. So you can, you could have a carrier actually compare your estimate and your pricing to Xactimate's. And just to give you an idea, so there was a contractor who was trying to get into a TPA program, and the TPA actually accepted the contractor's pricing because it is all itemized. It is all broken out. It's produced by a third party. It's not like the contractor is just typing in what they want. It's based on a third party independent review, and published. So what's kind of cool too is, let's say it does go to litigation. We have all the substantiation. We have tables. We have sheets that we actually calculate based on actual data that we could testify to it being valid. And of course, we don't have a financial interest in the outcome of these either. It's essentially a membership program. So we're not in it to make money or get kickbacks. We're in it to have the contractor be able to represent their costs, but be able to use independent parties to establish what those costs are. So objectivity is important. And you know me, I love that word. So
I like the word fluff sometimes.
I know you do. I'm going to say it, fluff.
He likes fluff.
Before we got on, you used the word moist, and I was like,
I did do that before we got on, didn't I? Yep.
Yeah. I felt it was on purpose, possibly.
It may have been, Matt.
I would start posting what Sarah keeps commenting on, but I feel like she's just copy pasting stuff from Verisk 360's website. And if you guys really want to see that, you can go to it yourself. She's talking about how we feel about Xactimate pricing being baked in claims pricing. It's a large source of their report pricing data. I think that we talked about that a little bit before. All just because they hit complete, it's going into their system.
Yep.
So Andrew, to understand what it is that you could do for like my company. So if I said, hey, this is my price to do this roof, and I want to operate on a certain profit margins, you could build custom Xactimate pricing to do that for me.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. So essentially we take the actual overhead, we make sure that we understand the contractor's like needs, like where do they want their margins to be? And we kind of obviously if something seems unreasonable, we're going to tell you, so there's a lot of transparency there, obviously, because we're looking at your actual financial data. So if there is fluff, Matt, like we'll be able to see it. But also it's protected by an NDA. So if you're a member, we actually send an NDA out. So we don't disclose your financial data. We don't send it to the carrier. And we actually have reports that you attach to every estimate. So the report you actually submit showing and substantiating your data. And then your estimate would really just be an exhibit attachment to that report. So essentially it's saying, hey, we're not using default published pricing. We're actually part of this membership program. This is how we deviate from default published pricing. Here's some example scopes of work. And this is where we kind of fall. And then it just kind of goes through, and it's really just trying to, and it's intending to present it professionally and not just, here's my custom priceless estimate, pay for it.
Do you get pushback from the carriers on that?
So it's relatively new, but like I said, I will say we had a TPA accept, which is huge, a contractor who's in the program, and TPAs work with carriers obviously very closely to get these claims resolved. So if you're in a TPA program and your pricing is approved through this program, obviously that's kind of a really good way into carriers as well. But point being is that it's valid. It's not just made up. It's not just margin driven. It's overhead driven, which is huge.
And it's coming from someone, you're creating this through CAG, and there's some certifications for that.
There's some what, Matt? Sorry.
Construction Analytics Group. So Brandon is the one that I was talking about that gave me the ideas on some of that Mad Sky type pricing. He posted a really great synopsis yesterday. But he just wrote this, that the entire MSW ITEL stuff, this is the pricing. Mad Sky is deep rooted. It's a bunch of shenanigans. Carriers are actually signing contracts with ITEL for them to provide discounted shingle pricing. Then ITEL sends them a report each month showing the carrier how much more or how much money they are saving. ITEL only gets pricing from MSW, and they don't check or go to any other sources. MSW gets a national contractor price as a buyer and rebates from shingle manufacturers to get lower pricing. That's why the pricing is lower. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
So if you have to buy from that one retailer to get that specific price, then buy everything from that. You don't want to buy from multiple different places. And that's what he was suggesting yesterday.
Gotcha.
And then
Thank you.
But it doesn't include the nails and stuff. So I want to show one of these sample price list things. You sent me something before we got started today. You cool if I pull that up?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Yeah, just for context, this is essentially the report I'm referring to that you would attach your estimate to. And it's really just saying, hey, we're in a custom price list program. This is how it's determined. This is what it is. This is what it solves. It's really based on, some of the user agreements, some of the language in there we cite. You having issues over there, Matt? You look confused.
A little bit. Hang on.
So while he's looking for that, how different is this from like a regular supplement like somebody like Balance Claims or somebody who does a supplement versus what you're offering?
Yeah. So in my set, I think my interpretation of supplement is really item based. Like, hey, you didn't include the necessary line items. Obviously, this is more specific to price. So if you include a line item, that's representing your cost as a contractor, but you still need the necessary line items. So the program does not. It's not an estimation membership where. If you generate an Xactimate estimate, you still need to include necessary line items. Carriers may reject that, starter, ridge, hip should be included, whatever. And obviously that's going to affect the end cost. But the intent is every unit price in Xactimate, all the retail labor rates represent your costs, which is big. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's going to take me a second. I had to close the program and reopen it. Let's see if that works now. It's always technology.
Every time.
Every time.
When it works
Still
awesome.
not there.
When it don't work, man.
What is this? I don't know what that is. That's not it though. That's just a blank screen. There's nothing there.
I can try to show you.
This could be possible. Does it say share screen on your side? Does it give you that option?
Yeah, I should have it. Here,
Do
I'll pull it up on my end.
Ow, it showed up. But if you can do it yourself so you can scroll through where you want to show, let's do that. Do it on your end.
Okay, sounds good. Let me pull it up.
All right. So in the meantime, thank you, Brandon Ford. When Sarah Mary Parker says thank you to you, then you know you have arrived. You have given everything. She's the best. Not now. All right, I don't know what's going on there. Okay, here we go. Whoa.
Is my screen being shared?
It's on there. We can see it.
Lovely. So yeah, this is essentially the
You should
cover
zoom
letter.
back into it though.
All right. Yeah, I can't see the.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So essentially, it's just a cover page here. Obviously, myself and Kyle that produce these. So walks through what is the Xactimate Custom Prices program. Talks about and cites how many contractors commercially, residentially are in the United States, kind of talking about there's obviously a lot of contractors and having their prices inputted and represented is important. Talks about what is Xactimate software, talks about what is market price, essentially prevailing wage, obviously citing a lot of documentation there. This is actually the citation I was citing earlier within the user agreement. So we obviously cite that because that's important. So yeah, this essentially says, like right here, so the program is intended or ensures that the contractor requirements of the member are correctly represented with each individual Xactimate line item. Talks about how Xactimate line items are structured because a lot of people don't know that retail labor rates are really where a lot of these components are housed, really specific to overhead. So talk about that, talk about how all these things are structured, talk about price lists on geographical areas. So talking about how price lists and how the nomenclature works, things like that. And then we kind of go into
what would the custom price list show on the name of the price list?
So usually it would be the default nomenclature because that's important to know kind of where it's sourced from. So when it's custom, and you may find carriers do this occasionally, or when you do, you're going to find that it actually deviates from the standard nomenclature. So like in this case, Colorado, Denver, 8X is the version, 28 next one, May 23. So usually if you see a custom price list, there may be an additional underscore. There could be a 1 at the end of this, which is pretty common, or it could have an entirely different name. But anytime you see a convention outside of this, you'll know it's custom. But we will usually name it. We'll integrate this so it'll still maintain that, but we'll usually put another underscore and put the contractor name or the membership number or whatever. So yeah, and then essentially talks about just more context information. We give some example scopes of work. So for instance, roofing, we say, all right, let's say for a standard roof situation, not this specific project you're working, but just to give you comparison as to a scope of work that's a sample scope of work and a published price list versus the custom.
Before you get that, there's a good question that just popped up. It says from Tom Hammer, is the assumption that the contractor's specific cost for labor and materials, given that they were purchased on the open market, is reflective of the prevailing or going rate in the market?
So in my experience, and Kyle Larson, who I work with as well, and he's had about 30 years of general contracting experience, so he's been really valuable in kind of creating this membership. But for the most part, you'll find that materials, equipment, things like that are actually pretty accurate in Xactimate. Most contractors are pretty happy with that. And if it's off, it's easy to identify and update it if you have Xactimate training and stuff like that. And especially because materials don't have markup. So it kind of avoids some complication there in that they're raw costs. So you're at $150 a bundle or whatever, and Xactimate's at 125, you can change it, boom. And then you just cite the cost, and you should be able to get that approved pretty easily. Labor is where it gets confusing. So this is obviously just addressing the labor portion of it. But I think most contractors, if they have issues, it's going to be on the labor side. So, so it basically walks through some roofing scopes of work. I will say in this one, so this was an interesting one where the roofing trade in this example actually went down barely, which is kind of funny. You might be like, I don't want it to go down, but it actually represented their cost. So does it really matter? No. So in this one, it was a very small deviation. And again, this is just a sample, so it's not going to be specific to.
Which contractor's information did you use to come up with this?
So this would have been a P&L. It would have been discussions on kind of where they want their margins to be, obviously in a reasonable manner, not anything crazy. And then kind of comparing that to Xactimate, integrating the retail labor rates, and then showing how they deviate. So, and it was actually kind of interesting. Again, this is just a sample, so this is going to vary obviously depending on your costs. But something interesting is that, I've encountered quite a few contractors that think roofing pricing in Xactimate is absolutely insane high. And it really depends on the area. Like these are like Denver, Colorado Springs contractors, whatever. But they think a lot of the other trades are ridiculous. And you'll see what I'm talking about on this one. So for this specific contractor, it went down like $60 for this job, and down $60. You get into interior. So we kind of talk about
before you get into the interior, it's really interesting. I'm looking at this, and the normal rate for laminate comp shingle to replace is $365 a square, right? Your sample has it at $307 a square.
Yep.
And so it's
so if you look at the
difference in the per square amount for the laminate shingle, lower, and you still ended up only $60 total off. So the differences are in all the other items more than the main component of the roofing.
Yep. Well, and interestingly too, like you'll notice in this example, you have roofing labor, HVAC labor, soffit fascia gutter labor, painting. So pretty typical just roof situation. Obviously you have demolition labor in here as well. So you'll notice like $78 for a move. Based on the contractor's overhead, that should actually be at $150. And that's based on the overhead of the DMO trade even. So obviously we're not going to get into the DMO RFG thing, but the important thing to know is that every rate in here is specific to the contractor. But you're right. I mean, that went up. This went down. It doesn't matter that it all represents the overhead of the contractor. So in this case, obviously small change. You get into interior. So we just provide some kind of an extensive restoration of, I think it's a bathroom in here we use. So these are all the different types of labor we use in this. So remediation, framing, insulation. Don't know why it's doing that. Sorry. Painting, electrical, things of the like. Going down, showing the default published price lists. And then the custom one. And in this one, it's interesting. It actually went up quite a bit. So a lot of contractors will find that for other trades, like they may be very happy with roofing. And if anything, they think it's high, but they get into framing, painting, things like that. They can't make money, So again, it's funny because I think a lot of people coming to this screen, they'd be like, oh, are you kidding me? That's a pretty big increase. But again, it's based on their overhead. Like we're basing this off real figures that are reasonable, can be showed as reasonable. And all of these things are discoverable if it ever went to trial. We could testify as experts if it got to that point. But point being is that it's all specific to the contractor. It's not just hypothetical figures where every trade has a different overhead percentage. If you're a general contractor and you're subbing stuff out or you're contracting out labor or using in-house employees, you're using Xactimate and it's always going to represent your costs. So
I mean, if you want to do this and you wanted to do some retail work, it'd be very easy to actually use Xactimate for retail in these.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes down to, the restoration remodel labor efficiencies versus new construction. So you can kind of tinker with those too. But it is nice because even if you're a retail contractor, if we're inputting your labor overhead and you have more of a retail kind of organizational structure, then voila. So you can use it. And a lot of retail guys will be like, I couldn't represent my costs in Xactimate. I'd lose jobs because, it's just, I'd be too high. I'd lose clients. So
a lot of retail guys are way higher than Xactimate has in there. This would allow them to. Yeah, I mean, they could always have done it, but people are afraid to work with this. The fact that there's a certification backing it up, I think, makes this viable.
Yeah.
Russ has a good question here. It says, isn't providing a custom price list essentially the same as conducting a lump sum price?
So one of the issues there, and in my opinion, I honestly don't like lump sum price. I think it doesn't necessarily work. I think it might work sometimes. Sure. You probably have a great argument to use it, but the ultimate reality is, and I think from an expert witness perspective, so you have to excuse that a little bit, but like in front of a jury, let's say if they just saw 10K and the carrier's at 5K, they're going to ask and want to see a breakdown of why you're at 10, they're at 5. And if the carrier is using tools like Xactimate and all these, even if they're not necessarily accurate, if they provide all this data to substantiate their 5K and you still are like 10K, I'm not showing you my costs, it's not going to work. So I think the value in this is that you have the same itemization that you've been using in Xactimate for years, but you're representing your own costs. So if there's disputes on where it's low and you hone in on the labor part, that's substantiated by your own P&L. It's substantiated by a third-party independent source that actually publishes the price list for you. So I know we could talk about lump sum, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me there. But again, it's more based on the expert side and the jury side and what methodologies are required. And it's not, kind of going back to the requirements like Rule 26 report. I mean, you have to show substantiation. So that's really where that's coming from. Xactimate user certification. So obviously just pointing out a very low user certification rate. So there's only about a 1.6% for levels 1, 2, and 3. And there's only about a 15th of a percent that are level 3 based on 349,000 claim handling professionals. So that's cited as well, at least data.
0.15% is not a 15th of a percent.
What was that?
No, keep going.
A 15th of 1%. Crazy. So yeah, and then you get into the attachments. So essentially we have obviously the membership. So it looks something like that. Go down into, my CV's attached. We have Kyle's CV attached. So just talking about, kind of our experience, who even generated the price list. And then it's set up to where Exhibit 4 would essentially be your custom or your estimate. So you work a project, you would attach, we actually create report macros. So essentially you're using this as a macro in Xactimate, and anytime you push out an estimate, it's attached as Exhibit 4. So anytime a carrier gets one of your estimates, they're going to see this page first, and then your reports essentially at the end in Exhibit 4. So,
and right there it says prepared by, and this one says Andrew Behrens. Is this? This
so
is
we both
program certification.
Yep.
Document.
Yep. So we both prepare it. So yeah, the letter obviously is me because I own Construction Analytics Group, Xactimate certified trainer. Yep, okay, that's right. And then Kyle Larson, he's the one that's had about 30 years of general contracting experience. He has pretty extensive experience making custom price lists, but we really just tried to team up and create like kind of a powerful duo to kind of address that problem in the industry. So.
I mean, it's a unique and cool idea. Everyone knows that you can manipulate Xactimate to match what it is that you do. Very few people actually do that because it's an argument. Having that certification involved might remove some of the argument that goes with it. I'm really interested to find out if that is how that ends up happening. I think it's really cool. The insurance companies have had their own price list for a long time.
Well, and essentially, I mean, you have guys like Steve Badger that constantly hound on, contractors aren't even charging that cost in Xactimate, like, they're using Xactimate and then they're representing things that they're not even incurring. And obviously you get a lot of issues with that.
And the fluff.
But I mean, point being, and there are a lot of components to it, right? You have to construct Xactimate estimates with all the necessary components. But then the price, if it has no specificity to you as a contractor, you're kind of opening the door to a lot of issues, So
I think it's really cool. I hope that it ends up being very successful for you. And we're actually running up on time. So if there's anything else you want to talk about with that, how does someone get a hold of you to talk about that if they want to get involved?
So you can email training@constructionanalyticsgroup.com. My email is andrew@constructionanalyticsgroup.com. I make you spell it out.
Oh my God, that is so long.
I know. But
Does anyone know how to spell analytics?
If they don't, then don't reach
I don't know how to spell that.
Analytics.
I don't think that's how it's spelled.
It is actually. So
it is analytics.
Analytics.
Directly from the horse's mouth.
But yeah, and then my train with cag.myabsorb.com is the website. That's where all my Xactimate training is too. But that's actually where you go to purchase and enter into the membership, and that's where you actually upload like profit loss statements, things like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of use Absorb to the best of my ability. Matt, I know you hate it, but I like it.
Not a fan. That element is rough, but it's a lot better for the online stuff that I'm doing now, and honestly. It would probably work out great with what I'm doing now.
Andrew, you've caught my attention, so I'll be checking your website out.
Andrew knows his shit, guys. If you guys want to get some training, he does some low slope stuff. When's your next low slope class?
I have it in August. As of right now, I have one. Let me go in my calendar here. Yes, August 7th, 8th, 9th.
There you go.
Colorado.
Yeah, I will personally attest that Andrew knows his shit. What he teaches in that class is legit. You will learn a lot. I learned a lot when I went through it with him. And I still use quite a bit of what was taught in that class today. So if you're interested, reach out to Andrew. He's going to go back through and probably post the links to this stuff on the Facebook, and then I can share it to other places as well. So Andrew, I'm kicking you off. Thanks for being on me.
Yep, thanks.
All right, guys, that was kind of interesting. Something new, something that might actually help. I don't know yet. Personally, I think it will because of who it's coming from. The dude is legitimate. He doesn't fluff things, but it's up to you. He's just putting in your pricing in there. I think it's a really cool idea.
Very cool idea.
If you guys end up using that program and you'd like to talk about your experience with it, I'd like to know about it. Before you go, I am looking for engineer reports from Hurricane Ian, as many as you can give me. If you have an engineering report from Hurricane Ian and the policyholder is willing to allow you to send it to me, even if it's redacted, I don't care. Send it to Matthew, spelled with 1 T, at listentothisbull.com. And that's it. I'll see you guys next Tuesday at 6 p.m. I hope you guys deal with the bullshit a little bit better now. That's the best sign off I've come up with yet.